Yes.
I'm looking to host. You started? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Good.
Dag Jan.
Dag Michel. Hi Vera.
All right. So we said that, well, first of all, thank you very much that you're here. I think, I can see Pierre is also there. He's one of the partners also working with us from Spinel Advisory. So the idea is to look at education from a kind of a more deeper perspective. I think we're not going to be able to solve all the specific problems of education. As we know, it's a whole field. But in terms of a broad brush approach, and Sarah, hi, thanks for joining again. The idea is to look at education more from a systemic and, in terms of methodology, but also from a purpose approach. What is our education actually heading us towards? And what is the outcome of our education? So we look at the impact of what's actually we see around us in the world, or what's happening from a social, environmental point of view, and from a human happiness point of view. So we're becoming happier as a whole because of our education, thanks to the technologies, thanks to the arts, the science, all together. I think we have, as we know, very compartmentalized education system. They say it's based on the 19th century model. It hasn't evolved much. So we're waiting for people to join as we get into this discussion. Is everybody able to hear fine?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, so that was just a brief introduction in terms of how we're doing it. And again, just saying about a little brief point on this webinar series. Jean-Paul and I got together, with the launch of Human Nation and materials innovation that's been going on for some time, because in different ways we have this anxiety that we know that we have to act, and we know that many people share that anxiety in terms of how do we turn that into creativity and action, because we can philosophize forever, as we know, and talk about things, but we want to now see how we can put that into action by bringing different actors in innovation, change makers, people that are actually doing things, but really working with entrepreneurs above all, because we're all in different ways entrepreneurs. So it's a question of how do we actually turn that into a business model, and business model doesn't mean that it has to be, make us rich or profitable. It can be, I mean, that's what we want, but it's about how do we make it something of value that people want to ingest, and to pay for and to spend their time doing. And that's the bit around value creation, around the business model, which sometimes we forget that business is not only about profit, it's about creating value. And of course it has to be economically sustainable. So from a business perspective, we also look at education, the NGO sector, and in this case, we look at the public sector in their role and in shaping our thoughts. So education is the core of all this, because it's been the underlying driver for how we've, come to think and perceive our world, and how we relate to one another even. Because that's very much the essence of our education, how we learn to relate. And I think the crux of this goes back to the scientific revolution, where we adopted this reductionist mindset, and we kind of disconnected from this holistic approach, potentially. That's my own view, but I think it gave us a lot of insight into technology, into the atomic level of how things work, and we did great things with it. And we have come as far as we've come. A lot of good come out of it, but we also see that the part that we didn't deal with is these externalities, the crisis of the commons, which is why you're here, Michel. And Anne as well talks a lot about that. And Vera, from a leadership point of view, talks about the crisis of our leadership, our ethics, and our values. So I think we have a good set of ingredients here to each one put their perspective, and then come on to a systemic approach to really think about what are the solutions that we want. So we want to be very action focused and solution focused. What are we having to put in place to address these existential challenges? And I was going to use as a timer this atomic scientist's clock, saying that we are like 1 minute to midnight now, because it's the closest we've been to midnight since they started this process since the Second World War, no? And it's something that we don't have a lot of time, but actually our timekeeper is going to be Jean-Paul, and he will remind us when we need to move on to the next question. So I'll let Jean-Paul start.
So a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here with us and sharing this mid-morning session. I think Sharam already introduced quite a lot the subject we're going to be talking about. I just want to mention, for those that do not know me, that I'm working as a consultant. My mission is to bring regenerative innovation to life and do so in an industrial context, and try to help companies to find what is the value, find how to bring business value, but also with a positive growth. And positive growth, I mean how they can also engage into developing communities and developing assets that are necessary for our life on Earth. Besides that, I would like to just continue with this, the first questions, and I pass the floor to Sharam again. So please, Sharam.
So we were going to do the cloud of where we're from, but I think here we are not so many have joined yet. So we think the topic maybe also when you talk about education, government, and NGOs, and we did a lot of publicity on the LinkedIn, and maybe it's significant because people in the business field, they kind of see like what we do is business, and what happens there is nothing to do with us, and I think that it's very significant that our education actually brings us to this world, and we can continue learning throughout life, as we know, especially nowadays. And in fact, most of the things we're learning is post-education. From what we learn from school, we're learning constantly from each other and the internet. And then the NGOs, they're going through a massive crisis because they emerged to solve a lot of the externalities that happened with the commons. So there's some interference from. So they dealt with a lot of the crisis we had at the time, post-war, to deal with the externalities of the private sector and actually government not actually doing their job, because if the government was really regulating and doing things to serve the common good, let's say, then NGOs wouldn't have much to do, you'd think, because that's what governance is about. So they did a great job is pointing their finger and saying this is where all the problems are. But I think we lack a business model in the NGOs, and that's why a lot of them are actually trying to transform to social enterprises, because living off donations and philanthropy, I think is not a sustainable business model, because we're always having to beg people to kind of think of externalities as something that is outside their real, is something good they're doing to then fix the problem end of the pipe. It's like, okay, we made the mess, and now let's pay the people that clean up the rubbish to go and clean up the rubbish. They do it anyway, and to me, I remember when I was a kid, we used to throw the banana peel out of the window of the car, or I used to see people throwing cans. When you're going down to the coast, people would just throw cans of Coke or whatever out of the car window, and it was just completely normal, thinking that, we just throw it away and somebody will clean it up, and it was just this mentality was, I think we didn't have this concept of spaceship Earth, as we call it, and the systemic thinking, and that's a failure of education, at home or whatever. So this is just opening up the debate. I think businesses have a major responsibility here, and entrepreneurs, and to somehow bring this together. And I think we also see a crisis in education in universities, that maybe they're not being so business focused because they're too busy investigating in a traditional sense, and not actually, a lot of the innovation and the investigation is not going to the market to solve real challenges, because they're not directing it to really solving those challenges and developing business models that are actually going to work. And trying that with entrepreneurs to put it into practice, with communities of citizens that are going to use it, and engaging them. So we see a crisis on all fronts. And I think this topic is actually very good, because I think we're trying to bring this together. And it's a shame that more people haven't been able to join. So we'll record it, and just to let you know, this is not going to go at all to waste, because what we're trying to do is get a report out of this. Just for you to understand also a little bit the objective is, we are building a community. The purpose of what we're doing with Jean-Paul and various others is creating an ecosystem in Human Nation that brings together the different actors, from ethical finance, from the governance point of view, from mentors, from above all the entrepreneurs, to attract these entrepreneurs so that they can get funding, they can get the support they need to do things in a different way. And that's the kind of, it's a beta trial, and we want to create a case for the business case for Human Nation, to say we need a open source, peer-to-peer kind of ecosystem for these regenerative businesses to be able to grow. What we can't have is what's happening today, which is these regenerative businesses are doing things, and then they end up being put into these traditional Silicon Valley accelerators, and suddenly they're like, what am I doing here? Because we don't have a business ecosystem that is designed, what I call it, the slow accelerator. You know, the slow accelerator we don't have. You know, we have fast accelerators designed for a completely different kind of nature of the way of thinking and the kind of businesses. So we are trying to create slow accelerators that can allow these type of purpose-driven organizations to thrive, and for investors to come and invest in what we call patient investors, ethical investors, sustainable investors, people that think more long-term and mid-term about social. So let's try and attract that. And actually yesterday I had a call with Pierre and Aqua Asset Management that they were interested to be partners. So we're very excited to be working with them, for example, because they're looking at this kind of businesses. We're looking at biogas, energy, and all these different projects we work on. So hopefully we can start building this ecosystem. And I see a lot of people are interested. So thank you very much for being here, and I open it to yourselves to present yourselves. And Jean-Paul, you were going to you already presented yourself, so I'll let you go in the order, the experts, if you want to go in the order that you appear. And you want to start?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this excellent initiative, this ecosystem of regenerative entrepreneurs. I really love it. My background is in philosophy of education, and actually my research was on the question, on what basis do we say that something is good for education or good for humanity? You know, how do we define human progress or human development? And on the basis of what, you know, what is the underlying assumption that we know what the real aim for humanity is, and that, you know, as a baseline, a standard by which we can say, okay, this is going in that direction. So this is progress. And I can tell you that this reflection now, you know, this background in ontology, you know, how do we define humankind? How do we define the rest of, you know, what is around us, and how we relate to that, both, you know, in knowledge, epistemology, and also in behavior and ethics. It's hugely relevant today. I mean, it was quite abstract and theoretical, but right now, you know, I understand why it was so important that I did that, and I'm taking my students there as well. Then after working a while in the university, I was frustrated because those questions at that time especially were considered irrelevant. You know, you're not preparing the students for the labor market, so you cannot be a good professor. So then I left and I worked for about 20 years in the NGO sector, mainly with families in poverty, with a strong gender approach. You know, we worked with women in poverty, networks of social enterprises that worked with women in poverty. And it was, our approach was there, you know, what most people think of when, you know, when they look at poverty, even the experts at university, they say, well, given the economic and financial model, you know, the poor people are falling out, so we must adjust the poor people so that they fit our model. That is like the standard approach. Given the economic, financial, exclusive model, profit-oriented, productivity-oriented, those people are not productive, we kick them out. It is their responsibility and responsibility of the whole, you know, education sector to make them, you know, prepare them for the job market, make them more productive. And our approach was a different model of work, to say, like, given all the needs of society, you know, not just of the economy, but all the needs of society and all the talents that we have in society, how can we redesign our economy and our financial system so that all those talents can be mobilized and valorized to fulfill the needs of society? So that is where I got in touch, you know, with this whole social innovation business ecosystem, mission-driven organizations. But also the commons, you know, the groups of commons, the community currencies, you know, where local talents are being valorized out and kept outside of the competition with the hard money, with the bank money. So we discovered and explored all kinds of different ways of developing knowledge about that, because as I told you, like the classical approach was like, well, we know what the standard is, what is good for humanity. You poor people, you're sort of like, you know, missing the standard. So how can we improve you to fit our standards, our model of development? And our approach was more to work with them as co-experts and to say, you know, by, you know, I think it was Einstein is believed to have said, you cannot solve your problems with the same kind of thinking that, you know, that you used when you created them. But how can you understand the blind spots of your own thinking? You know, by thinking, can you discover the blind spots of your thinking? So it's by talking with the other, as Levinas would call it, you know, the people who are outside of your system, and listening to them that you can discover what your blind spots are. So we developed a methodology called transdisciplinary research with women in poverty. And they showed us, they said, in your model, it's very individualistic and you want to help us by putting us in your individualistic model. But in the cultures that we come from, African and Asian, community is much more important. And, you know, creating solutions together, having a clan around you, having a community around you. So then we brought that back to the, you know, to the person who asked for the research and said, your framing of your problem has to be, how can I support those people to create their communities again, to restore those commons? And when we did that, more and more the universities started coming to us and said, like, how did you do that? You know, how did you come up with such incredible results? So then, you know, that is the third phase in my career when I'm now back in the university, but really to work on that epistemology and education on how can we help everybody to step out of this, you know, to unlearn this very unsustainable system of work and productivity that we think is, you know, progress or development, and how can we co-create together, you know, things that serve the community again, as well, you know, and the community including the other species. So that's where I'm coming from. Like for the moment, I'm in a couple of Horizon 2020 projects, but the main project I'm working on now is called STEAM, like STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And then how do we add, if adding is the right word, the A that should prepare those, you know, scientists and engineers for the Anthropocene, for the complexity and non-linearity and, you know, all the big problems that we have now. And some people say like, oh, it's not by, you know, going to a museum and doing some arts that you're gonna do that. We still need, systemic thinking is part of the big A, but this is what I'm working on currently. And well, I'm excited.
Fantastic. It's so great to have you.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
good, very inspiring.
Thank you, Michel. You want to go ahead now?
Right. Yes. So I'm the founder of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, which is kind of a global research network. So we have activists and researchers who want to understand the commons and what we call peer production. And so maybe because I see that Anne gave a bit longer introduction, so I'll do the same. It's kind of like a mini presentation already. So the idea is that we are really in a different value regime. So I'm sorry I didn't get your name because it says Human Nation on your image.
Sharam.
Okay, Sharam. So the basic idea today is that we create value through extraction. So you have to extract value from scarce resources, be they human beings or natural resources, and then the externalities, which you described very well, this is what we're going to do either through taxation, redistribution, or philanthropy. So in other words, we always extract first, and then we deal with the with the damage that we've caused. And there was this famous study that looked at externalities of the top 40 French companies and said zero of these companies would make any profit if they would be responsible of cleaning up the damage they're causing. So this is the kind of system that was dominant for 200 years. And so when we look at what we call peer production, we see really a new value regime. So basically the general idea that I propose is that because of the digital networks that we are using, they create new capacities, and essentially this kind of move where open collaborative systems. So not closed systems based on entities that compete with each other, but open collaborative systems where people and entities come in and out, but that they persist as a network organization, or you can call it a platform if you like. And so what we see happening in these contexts is that the value regime is contributory. So the word value doesn't come from extraction, value comes from contributing to that commonly recognized good. And usually these communities have a shared social object, whether it is making free software or creating common knowledge or creating shared designs or making things together. There's kind of a common social object which creates, which structures the community. And the people who contribute are considered to be the value creators. And so you have at the core of value generation in this model, not privately competing companies, entities, but you have what I call a productive community, which consists of individuals, companies, co-ops, whoever is participating. And so the second step then is when these people, need to make a living, need to create livelihoods based on these contributions, that also changes the logic of the market entities that work with these commons. And so this is, I think, in general, the step from extractive to generative. So how do I, as a corporate entity, a cooperative entity, add value to the community and the resource base that I'm working with, that I'm collaborating with, right? So I'd like to use the word entrepreneurs instead of entrepreneurs, because etymologically, entrepreneurs means taking in between, and entrepreneur means giving in between. So how can you make a living by enriching the commons, as it were, right? So typically, if you're a farmer, instead of making money and impoverishing your soil year after year, you're an organic farmer and you improve the soil year after year. And there's a very good example of this, which is Terre des Liens, which is a big, how do you call it, CLT, Community Land Trust movement in France. And already in 2016, they calculated that only the depollution costs which the state no longer has to take up, you know, the water agencies, saves the French state 300 million euro per year. So that's really interesting, right? This is a generative. So in other words, and this is the problem of our system, that we don't count this. There's no mechanism today that allows people who create positive externalities to be rewarded in an easy way outside of philanthropy and taxation for these generative activities. And I think this is a big reform that we need, a big structural transformation, is how do we find circular finance mechanisms where generative activity directly leads to income generation, so that all the people who contribute to either, you know, their own common good in their specific commons, but you could actually put this as a societal issue, like care, right? All the people who care for others. How do we create financial mechanisms that allow the creation of these livelihoods? So this is a first issue, is how do you relate the commons, the contributive community, to a new type of generative market entity that, you know, is commons friendly and that is contributive as well to these common goods. Then maybe one more thing I want to stress is, what about the state? Or the public good rather than the, you know, the private good or the common good of a particular community. And so if you look at the emergence of, so what we call peer production and commons-based production, we see a new type of NGO, which is not the same as the old ones. In other words, the old ones, basically they're a copy of corporations. They have a different goal, but they organize in the same way. They have an internal hierarchy. They think the world is scarce, so they direct resources to the scarcity, and they often compete with each other. And sometimes you hear really awful stories about how NGOs, you know, treat each other on the field, because they are also competing for a scarce good. It's a different one than the companies, but, you know, there's this common logic behind it. And so what you see now is these, I call them for benefit associations, and they take the point of view of abundance. In other words, here is a problem. We know there's enough skills and capacities and people willing to contribute in the world. So let's enable and empower this ongoing contribution and cooperation to occur. And so if you explode this from the micro level, where you have the productive community, the generative market players, and the for benefit association managing the infrastructure of cooperation, you can say, well, this is also a societal model, right? Where we have every citizen is a contributor. There's no human being that doesn't contribute to the common good somehow, even if you try not to. It's just something very organic and natural. Second, we have an ethical economy. So we see the economy as this generative activity. And third, we have what we call then the partner state, the enabling state, or the community state, whatever you want to call it. But a public good institution that enables what some people call the commons of capabilities, right? We want every citizen to have the same capacity to freely contribute to whatever commons of their choice that combines their passion with their skills and some social need that justifies the activity. So this is kind of the social model that we see, and most often, and I'm just concluding briefly because I think it's important to show this new value regime, is when we don't have the power, when we're small and marginal, when we're not the norm but the exception, then the standard strategy is going to create some kind of membrane around our ecosystem, right? And I use a bit the language of Bernard Lietard, who is a fellow Belgian, who deceased recently. And he used to make this distinction between warm and cold currencies, yin and yang currencies, male and female currencies. And he says every pre-capitalist society had both. Because let's face it, we cannot live without extraction. You know, we have to eat. Even if you're a vegetarian, you have to extract plants and eat them and transform them. So we shouldn't be idealistic that we can fool in a perfect utopian world without extraction. but we have to make sure that this extraction happens within the overall balance of the ecosystems and that we don't destroy them while we're taking what we need as human beings. And so the idea is to create this membrane to have strategies of income generation, but then to redistribute inside the membrane in a different way. So we're going to use warm currencies that represent contributions rather than simply wage work. That, you know, and the problem with wage work is that we only recognize certain activities as being worthy of getting a wage, and others we consider externalities. So I think the whole notion of externalities is something that should disappear. I mean, I still use it because, you know, we have to name it right now. But of course, it's fundamentally a mistaken language because these are not externalities, right? These are the conditions of life that we're talking about. And so basically, the big goal is a transformation towards an economic system, which is a steady state ecosystem that allows us, you know, to live as humans in full recognized interdependence with all other living beings. And I think this is you know, I'm going to write this summer, the first textbook on commons economics, even though I'm not an economist, but I think we can at least write how do you say that? It's an old word, prolegomena, you know, like the preparation of a future commons economics textbook. That would actually start from completely different premises than Economics 101, which is, you know, I remember, and this is about education, I remember when I was 18 and went to school, and my economics teacher would say, let's assume that. I said, no, that's wrong. And then he would just continue and say, let's assume this and let's assume that. And all the premises were wrong. And out of all the wrong premises, you build neoclassical economics, which is totally divorced from the conditions of life. And so I think we should start again. So this is not about amending economics. You know, this is about rethinking it from the ground up, you know, as if the world matters, basically, as if externalities are real and something. Yeah, so maybe just a word then about education, since this is a team. I don't think there is any formal institution that can, you know, kind of have the speed of learning that is necessary in a peer-to-peer network. I'm not saying necessarily this is a good thing, but this is the reality. So in other words, we are already moving to a world where people learn more informally from peers than they ever can learn from a formal institution. And here we have the same problems with externalities, which is that learning is not recognized. It's like a non-recognized externality. And let me just end with an anecdote. When I was in Ecuador in 2014, so if you're an indigenous student in Ecuador, you have to pay a textbook $80 a year. And it has to be a new one, because if you don't have a new one, all the other students look at you and say, oh, you know, you're a poor indigenous third-class citizen. So they feel obliged to learn, to buy these very expensive textbooks. And a completely different way would say, well, let the teachers write common textbooks, which are updated permanently and which you can download for $15 or $5 instead of $80, right? And that would be an educational commons that would put all the students on the same basis with the same access to tools. And that's what a commons is about. Commons is about mutualization. It's about engineering abundance instead of engineering scarcity, because I think that's what capitalism ultimately is. It's not just a market that allocates scarce resources. It's a system that engineers scarcity where there isn't, where there doesn't have to be any scarcity, because you can only create extractive value through that form of engineering. Anyway, I'll stop here, and I hope that was a bit useful.
Thank you very much, Michel. I think I noted quite a lot of things that we can come back to and make the connection. So I will pass the word to Vera. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I love how both from Anne and from Michel, like it's like pieces of puzzles. Like we're approaching the same thing from different angles, right? And it's slowly coming together. I'm I'm the founder of B-Spark Leadership Academy, and I created this academy driven by my personal and my professional experience. I come from Serbia, so when I was 14, around that time, I started thinking about the leaders, because I lived through a war, and I couldn't understand how could the leaders of the country do something and allow something like this to happen. Like, again, we are going back to what Michelle was saying, to that commonality, and that, like, what is the responsibility of each one of us. And first I was thinking how I can change that. And my first thought, was going into politics, which I discarded pretty fast. And then I said, well, maybe education, but education at that time, as we are discussing here, in my 16-year-old head, was just the traditional education, and I didn't see the way how we can do it through education. And then I thought, well, maybe business, because where there is power and there is money, they can actually influence something, and they can make a change for the world to change, right? But at the same time, it was a conundrum, because these are precisely the people who don't want to change because they're benefiting from this status quo, right? But then I said, well, maybe if I just go into this world and I understand what's going on, why are they behaving like they're behaving, maybe then I can understand what needs to be done in order to change all of this, right? So I ended up working in multinationals. I was working in multinationals for more than 10 years, always in strategic departments. And what I was doing in that time, apart from my job, was also to observe people, to observe reactions, how they behave, what decisions are they making, etc., etc. So 4 years ago, I decided to leave all that and to see what can we do to change these behaviors. And what I realized, I started investigating based on my own experience and also investigating what is there around. And what I realized is that the problems are always stemming from the same thing. And it's from people, like from individual behaviors and individual thinking of people, because at the end, when you put all those individual behaviors and thinking, it grows into the whole common thing, right? And then I said, okay, we need to deal with this. And the problem is that no one teaches, they teach us very well in at universities, technical things, but no one teaches us how to deal with ourselves, how to deal with others, and how to deal with the world, right? So my aim was to create these future-proof leaders who not only secure their own future, but they secure a future of a better society and a better planet in line with SDGs. Now, how can you do that is, first of all, you need to understand yourself, you need to understand others, and you need to understand the world, and you need to understand what is your impact in this world. Because I believe that if you're not doing something positive to change the world in the positive direction, you're already having a negative impact. Because if you're maintaining that status quo, then you're a participant in not changing it for the better when we are going in such a wrong direction, right? So in that sense, I saw, like, also from what Anne was saying and from what Michelle was saying, that we all have this common ground on what needs to be changed. And we are all striving to this in the same direction. And it's great to be connected all here to see how we can do that. But basically what we do at B-Spark is that we treat these future leaders in a holistic manner. And when I say in holistic manner, I will just guide you through what we are dealing with so you can understand what is it all about and why is it important. There are 3 pillars for me. The first one is how to strengthen their character so they can maintain integrity even in difficult situations, right? The second one is to empower them so they can influence others and they can maximize their impact. And finally, give them the support of an ethically solid community that can help them in their professional development, right? And the people that I'm looking for this are people who are the fighters, who have the talent, who have the drive, who want to change things, but they're lacking the tools to do so, right? So in the first part, how can we strengthen the character of people is, when you think about it, like we all are so busy all the time, and normally we don't even have time to think. And that is why we start with philosophy and critical thinking, because before you do anything else, you need to know what is important and what kind of questions you need to ask, right? Secondly, you need to understand yourself, who you are, why you are like you are. Because if you don't understand who you are, you cannot manage yourself. And if you cannot manage yourself, you cannot manage others. Then we have diversity, because although we will never be able to understand fully the person that we have in front of us, we can understand the differences that we have and build on those differences something much bigger than the sum of the parts, right? And that goes back to what Michelle was saying also. What is my value in this? What can I what can I do to bring value to this common goal? Then we also have proactive ethics, because like the ethics that are normally taught at schools, at least the schools that I have been at, is how not to end up in jail, but no one tells you what you actually need to do in order to develop something good. Then we have also circular economy, to inspire them so they can, and that's how actually I know Sharan, to inspire them what is going on in the world, and how, although you're one out of almost 8 billion people, whatever you do, it makes an impact. So what can you do in your personal and your professional life in order to change that? And finally, we have social entrepreneurship in this first part, social entrepreneurship and measuring social impact. Because if you want to influence the current leaders, you need to show them what is the concrete benefit for them. And that was also that's also what you were mentioning, Michelle, in terms of it needs to have like this circular financing, it needs to have some good to it, right? So this is the first part. The second part is much easier to understand because it's much more common, that is done at other institutions. It's about influencing others. So it's everything from public speaking, managing others, storytelling, mentoring, coaching, etc., etc. So direct influence. The difference here is that we start this direct influence from a basis of, and I think Anne was mentioning it, collaboration, right? So it's not on the basis who can win-win situations, but how can we create more value for everyone involved? From empathy, from using that also female energy that we call, it's not all transactional in the sense that, in the financial sense, but it's more transactional, not transactional, but overarching all that to create something much bigger. And then finally, in the third part, how to maximize your impact is, there are three things. The first thing is basically when we are in our best shape, mentally and physically, is when we get the best results. However, we don't take care about ourselves in a sustainable way. We are like, well, yes, it's just this week, it's this month, it will pass. And this is when the leaders behave the worst, and they have these short-term decisions. They are irritable. We all convert into these small or big monsters when we are under stress. So it is true. And this is why we teach them the importance of holistic nutrition, the importance of positive psychology, the emotional intelligence, yoga, mindfulness. So everything that has to do with your physical and mental well-being. Second part of maximizing your impact is that you need to know where to focus your energy. And I think that here everyone or has at least heard about Ikigai, or finding your purpose, right? So it's much easier to explain it these days than when I started. So basically, if you find that one thing that you're really good at, that is good for the world, that you can be paid for, is when you can maximize your impact. So this is what we are helping them also to do, to find that thing. And the second thing is that we are all, we have so many things and so many expectations of ourselves, and others have of us, that we are running around like headless chickens, trying to achieve everything. And at the end of the day, we feel guilty that we didn't manage to do so. And this is because we don't have our priorities clear. Even if we think that we do, many times those priorities are influenced by the society, by what is ingrained in us through our upbringing, etc. And finally, to prepare these future leaders, we need to prepare them for these uncertain times. And the uncertain time, how can we be prepared for something that we don't know what's going to happen, is basically through flexing their brains to be prepared for something that we cannot expect. And this is through creativity boosting and problem solving. So trying to build that muscle in order to do so. I will stop here. I just wanted to give you an overview of the holistic approach to an individual, because I think that is apart from systemic and more institutional way of looking at things, at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we are in Human Nation, of course. We are all humans, and we all are very complex beings. And if we try to become our whole selves, then we can try to bring that value to the others, and we can understand that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I think we are a bit all online, too aligned, and then maybe we have to, with Sharam, come up with something to put some how do you say, to dissonant voices into this conversation that is too well aligned, right? To create, because we had prepared some questions to kind of get some divergent thinking, but here we are very well aligned. So this poses another question, a problem of how to get a kind of different edges or different angles. I think I will maybe try to make a question for you three. And yes, even though we are all into the making the world a better place, I think we are very idealistic. All of us have very high purpose. And I think Vera already started giving some hints how she's approaching this problem, just how she's trying to do something about it. Maybe for Anne and Michelle, what are you doing? What are your fronts of war today, where you are trying to come up with some things to fight against this linear system that is very stable and doesn't want to move, right?
Michelle, you can start now.
Okay. Yes, well, I have a few. So just to give you one example, this is quite recent. So with the problems around COVID, so I live in Thailand, and I returned to Thailand when the COVID started. We have about 4 deaths per million compared to up to 800 in Europe. And I see this, not as an organic phenomenon, but really about state and market failure, especially in the advanced countries. And so what we've seen is, deep state and market failure because of neoliberal ideology, basically. And so total unpreparedness for the pandemic. And so as a result, we saw this enormous mobilization of peer production communities making anything from masks to ventilators to valves to, it was, so all the things I've been talking about for 10 years were suddenly visible and were on TV, on the first page of the newspapers. So civil society was actively compensating the failure of the established institutions. But here's the problem. The interface is not working yet. So hospitals, for example, were afraid to accept different products made by makers because they say, oh, you know, maybe somebody will attack us if we make a mistake. And so this is what we call public commons cooperation protocols, right? And this is entirely missing from our institutional design. We have market institutions, we have state institutions, we have NGOs. We have a lot of attention because basically we have a market state, so the state is there to help the market, but there is no sense that institutions can help civil society. And so this is the good example of this was Bologna, with the Bologna regulation for the care and regeneration of the urban commons, which allows any group of citizens to say, we want to care for this resource. And a whole, you know, institutional setup that allows this to happen with legitimacy and everything. Today, 250 cities are doing this in Italy, mobilizing 1 million people. So this is what we need basically in our society. So I'm working a lot on this. This is one area. So for example, Seoul wants to be a commons-based city. So you know, I'm going a few times up and down there. Another thing is what I really talked about in my talk, which is, you know, can we set up experiments for this kind of circular finance, right? So basically, today with distributed ledgers, you know, we can have public accounting systems. So open and transparent accounting system where people can say, this is what I did. This is my generative contribution. For example, a farmer who does biochar, you know, can prove how much he's been doing for decarbonization, right? So instead of having competitive systems, which are anti-holistic, because you can only win by pushing out other things, to set up collaborative systems where everybody can contribute, right? And I think today we have the technical affordances to do this. So I'm looking for an opportunity to basically show how we can create a financial system that can directly fund generative activity. So these are among the two kind of
warm money type of system.
Yeah, so I'm not looking to replace everything with commons. I'm looking to insert the commons in the existing world and going from a binary market state to a trinitary system where every solution has to have three aspects. And this, I think, already is an enormous advance for social innovation when we start thinking, you know, it has to be either this or that, but it can be a combination of the three. And then contextually, you know, it can be a different combination of those three elements, the commons element, the public authority, and the market players, right? And so this opens up a whole field of institutional design that is contextual to specific problems, specific regions. You know, it's not one model for all. You know, it's not one ring to save them all. It's a way of thinking. But I do think the commons is the only human institution which has historically preserved natural resources over the long term. Not the state, not the market. They're not designed to do this. But the commons historically has been doing this. And just to give you an example, I found one period in Japanese history, which you can look it up. It's called Tokugawa. For 200 years, Japan lived within its regional planetary boundaries with a stable population. It can be done, right? This is the proof we can do it. And so we need, yeah, as Vera said, and this is stressful when you hear it, when we don't have time really to do it. So I always say hurry slowly, you know, because at the same time, yeah, I think that's a really good term. I hadn't heard it before. Because you know, panic is also a bad response, right? When we think that we have to do everything right now, you can also be paralyzed or get in panic mode. And so that finding the right, you know, stoic way to respond to these emergencies is not an easy issue. But yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And do you want to add something to that? What you are doing? I mean, some fronts you are attacking.
Yeah, I think my concern, I've been, as I told you, I first went, worked in university, and then I left. I was disappointed. I went to the NGO sector. That's where I learned the most from working with women in poverty. And then I got invited to join the university back. But I understand that I think like what Vera is doing, there are some initiatives to address the current issues that we have, but it's not like we're already in this massive paradigm shift. I mean, we still have the old paradigm, and we just add one branch of extra specialism, and that's sustainability studies, or, it's again, I guess, encapsulated in the old paradigm. And I think, so students, if you like, you can take a course in sustainability, but it's an option, and your mainstream education will be, how can you continue to extract? And I find it unethical of our academic institutions to not tell the students that they have other options today, to keep that hidden from them. The whole thing that Vera and Michelle are talking about is a reality out there. It may still be marginalized, marginal, but as long as the universities treat it as marginal, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will remain marginal. So my big dream, what I would like to achieve now for, as long as I still work, is to give all the young people, one way or another, I don't know how we're going to do that, but to let them know, today you have a choice. You can continue on the extractive model, but there's so much happening already in the new model. And sure, it still has a lot of childhood diseases, like Michelle was saying, the interface protocols are still lacking, but that is where we could do really relevant and responsible research and innovation and learn together. So that is my focus now, and I'm very happy to be asked by the university, by KU Leuven, by Institute of the Future, Rega Institute, who are now really dealing with this COVID crisis, to look at STEM education, like how can we integrate that, that huge dimension of complexity and responsibility and empathy with other species and empathy with the South into the universities. We're using honors programs as kind of laboratories to develop that, because you have more flexibility there than if you try to change something in a master's program or in a bachelor program. And then with those, with these teams of honor students or talent students, whatever you want to call it, develop something that could inspire all young people. Because I don't think you need to, you need to all teach them a lot of theory, but, show them and let them experience what could happen if we go there, where now the regenerative economy is happening. And I've tried it out for 1 year now, and I must say the response from my students was just so grateful and so wonderful that, they say we're now starting to tell our friends that yes, there is an alternative future, we can write the future. So I think this kind of leadership, has, is also emerging. So I'd be happy to join forces with Vera and see how we can, inspire each other mutually.
And maybe Vera, you want to comment? What is what are one of the key dimensions for you to inspire leaders? Which is always what personally I have a problem with. Is we need more, like Yunus used to say, we need more social fictions. So we really have a future where we vision that we will feel all okay and there is no worries that will be scarcity. So how do you prepare people to move to this new world of the commons?
I will answer you that in a second. Just wanted to comment on what Anna was saying, is that I completely agree that it's, what I have really troubles with is that organizations and people want innovation, but not that much innovation. They are so afraid of change, so they want to be these pioneers and everything, but in a very small way. So it's very difficult to find that balance. And for the time being, because of the COVID, I had to froze the program in the way it has been done. And what I'm doing now is leadership assessment. What you're asking me now is more on one-on-one basis, assessing that person capabilities and what they can do, etc., etc. But can you repeat me your question, because I got lost in thought?
Personally, what I think is important when we're doing all this transformation is to have a very clear vision of the future, that is aligned with these values, but that today is not available. We have vision about the future that is a tech future, where we go to Mars. We go to many other places, but not about how we live together in the earth.
So I think that many people are seeing their mission or their vision or as this some big, huge change that will happen from one day to another. But what we need to understand is that the biggest change that you will achieve is by the small changes that you can incorporate in your everyday life. So again, what can you do in your everyday to bring value to those commons, to bring value to yourself, to your community, that is slowly building up towards your goal? Because what I see a lot in young people is that they're rushing, they are stressed out that they are still not making an impact. And again, like what Michelle was also saying, like hurry slowly. So putting them into perspective and into what they can achieve and how can they achieve it, and to be compassionate with themselves and to be patient with themselves. And it's not only them personally that will make the change in the world, but they need to be part of something much bigger. I don't know if that answered your question, but
I think it's fine. Sharon, do you have any remarks?
Yes, I mean, I think
we're close to the end. Sorry.
Yes, I think this webinar took a bit of a life of its own. I was writing that it's looking more like the Commons than any planned organization now, and but I think it's been very good. I was saying I'm happy to run over a little bit more as I'm flexible myself. Anyone can stay and we can keep recording it, and that's no problem. But just to also, I mean, just to wrap it up from my side, my conclusion is, I think it's very fundamental, this thing about empowerment and education, because I think there's a big picture thing that's emerging, that let's remember that we come from a militaristic kind of organization that's about dominance and control. I mean, you can take that back to even the Aryan invasions, or how that evolved into the empires, and then then the capitalistic organization, which is an extension of, what was the colonial, statehoods that went around, exploiting resources, but also more than anything, exploiting human beings. I mean, just look at what's happening in the US right now, with human beings standing up to something that happened over 200 years ago, and they're still concerned about this today. Because it is institutionalized, it is part of, the reality that we live in, that we are just continuing that same model. And people in wage labor, as you say, to different extents, we could argue, are part of this extractive system. So I think empowerment is very important. And let's remember that, from my point of view, I think one thing I really want to bring into action here, I think this is what innovation and entrepreneurship can really do, what I hope we can do through Human Nation, is about empowerment, to see exactly like what Anne said, that there is another reality, and what Michelle said about abundance thinking, because we are constantly educated to think about scarcity and thinking about these minutiae, because when you think about scarcity, it's much more easy to control an organization that's thriving, let's say, on scarcity. Then if we have a commons that's thriving on abundance, that gets a life of its own, and suddenly, I mean, you see this happening even at the city level, where the mayors are organizing themselves with a C40, for example, and suddenly standing up to the state and saying, we need to do these things on pollution, on climate change, on, you know, that it's kind of a mini commons approach, because they're suddenly like disrupting, you know, this old state hierarchy, and suddenly new things are emerging, and the state's saying, oh, we need to respond to this because the cities are actually calling their shots here, and they have most of the people living there. You know, and that is the commons. The cities are the commons. You know, so it's actually a lot to do with what Vera is doing about understanding the changing mindset, understanding the power we really have, and the education that we're getting to go out there and co-create or do business together in a different way, and relate together in a different way. And I think if we had that common mindset empowered, or if we change the chip, then suddenly we become organized like we're doing here. You know, we're all talking about the same thing, and going in the same direction. Now, those organizations that are doing things the old way, they are organized because they're also doing things the same way, and they're organized, but in a hierarchical way. If we can do the same thing in a non-hierarchical, peer-to-peer way, but having that common purpose inside us aligned, then we will all be organized and go in the same direction, you know, and do this. And this is the idea, you know, a little bit with Human Nation, is we get these peer-to-peer models that we demonstrate at work, and they make money for people to pay for their living, to be able to eat, to, you know, to have good quality livelihood, demonstrate the businesses that work, and then allow that to replicate organically everywhere in the world by demonstrating this best practice. So it's a little bit the idea, but just to open it to the floor also, I thought it would be very nice to have the contribution of others who are also participants in this call.
I just want to say I'm traveling, so I can, you know, stay maybe 5 more minutes, but I have to stop.
I appreciate
sorry.
that. Sure.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
So I'll stay until 16:10 my time, another 6 minutes. Okay,
thank you very much, Michelle, for being here. So is anybody from the floor, please, want to contribute?
I can say something. I've got to go shortly as well, unfortunately. I think I am quite different. I can't remember who mentioned it earlier about the diversity. I'm not an academic, okay, so I'm very, very operational. My background is mainly finance, but I've run a couple of businesses of my own. And I've kind of, don't get shocked when I say this, I've kind of fallen into sustainability. I've always known that what I've done is not quite right, but I've never really known why. And really interesting with what Michelle, I'm sure it's Michelle, said about working. So outside of a very, very big job and 3 children, I had a really big job in diversity to try and get girls to play football. So I got my kind of sustainability needs from working voluntarily whilst trying to keep a big job. And I think that is an absolutely key thing, what you just said, actually, and it's trying to find a way of getting that across, that I can find a way. But that's how I fell into it. And my view is it's aligned with what you think, but it's slightly different in that I think we just have to simplify it. You know, for everyone that really understands it and really knows the terminology, and it's great, and a lot of people completely get it, but there's so many people that don't. So what I'm going to be doing in terms of action is I'm launching a business hopefully next month. I've been saying next month for quite a few months, but it should be going live next month. And my kind of idea at the moment is to take it from established business. And I thought it was really interesting, again, what you said about the entrepreneur side. So I've just pushed my business idea through London Business School, and we didn't once talk about sustainability, not once, okay, apart from me, because I have my idea. And actually there's lots and lots of businesses being established. I'd say the majority, based on what I've seen, without sustainability. So that's a big area. I'm focusing on established businesses and trying to get them to understand what sustainability is, how they can benefit from it, and how they can benefit their communities. And I can't remember whose point this links to, but I wrote this down, is that I really think one of the ways to speed this up is to drive conversations, and actually this isn't a plan of mine, but actually falls into place. So established businesses, and by that I mean business been around for a while, they're going to have more employees, but they're also going to have families. Actually, a lot of the business owners will have families, and that, I'm a real believer in sparking conversation. So if you can get into established businesses, start talking about sustainability, that will speed things up a bit. So I don't have a really academic brain that's got lots of fantastic ideas, which you guys have, but mine is more of a, let's get in, let's get people talking, let's make it really simple for them, and help them measure and manage what they're doing. And I probably will be phoning Vera because the real thing is the leaders. It's really helping them understand it and train them, but it's not easy. It's not easy. So I just thought I'd throw that in my simplistic view of sustainability.
Thanks, Sarah. I think it's wonderful, and that's what entrepreneurship is about. Taking it to the street and making it happen. And I think this is exactly what we were saying earlier about making this link between academic institutions, the scientists, the innovation.
Yeah.
Because I think from what I've spoken to, and Jean-Paul was agreeing, and I think everyone agrees that many times they struggle and they have this deep anxiety and pain that they can't translate a lot of these ideas into the street, into the businesses. And that creates a huge level of frustrations for them as well.
I think so. And also I think for people that really understand it, they are probably thinking, why don't you understand it? Why aren't you doing anything? This is so obvious. So it's kind of bringing those two together in a simple way.
Yes, and Ambassador. So yeah, if you
Michelle is leaving.
Entrepreneur, yeah. Sorry, Jean-Paul, go ahead.
Last word.
Michelle is leaving, so goodbye, Michelle. Thank you for being with us.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real honor to have you here.
Yes, and let's keep in touch. I know Anne, but we can keep in touch and conspire a bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for inviting me. It was great to be here.
Bye, Michelle.
Thank you,
Bye.
Michelle. Wow.
Can I say something to what Sarah just shared?
Please,
Yes,
Anne.
please.
Sarah, thank you so very, very much for your. I mean, you should not be so humble. You're not, silly. You're very wise, and I think this is indeed, like you said. I came to business school and I felt that something was wrong. They did not tell me the whole picture. So this is exactly my dream, that all young people should at least know that what academia is telling them is only part of the picture, and that there is other wisdom out there, and they can find you and they can find Vera.
Yeah.
We can give them the seeds. And this is why I wanted to work in academia, because I think this is really the bottleneck for all the leaders of tomorrow, the entrepreneurs, teachers, the political leaders, the writers, so that is why I would like to focus there and tell them, to then bring it to their audiences.
Yeah.
Maybe migrant people or whatever. I had to choose my first target group, like my, what do you call it again? Ikigai? Is to plant the seeds in the academic world, because I think it's criminal that they hide this from the students, that they don't tell them there is a new emerging reality out there. And my experience, maybe to just wrap it up, is that and it links to what you also said, what it takes now to teach those students to, or to, no, I'm not teaching them, to learn, to create conditions where they can learn. It's learning with the head, the heart, the hands, and hope. And the head means, you know, thinking outside of that narrow box that their discipline is talking about, and seeing, you know, what we used to call externalities, but which is in fact really the broader conditions of life, you know, systems thinking, complexity thinking. You should at least, you know a little bit about both human things and natural things. That's the head, you know, learn to think more complexity and creatively outside the box. Then the heart for me is empathy, to feel the shame of what we have, the arrogance of colonialism and the arrogance of exploiting people and nature. Feel the empathy of what we've done, and how, you know, how beautiful it could be if we could make peace again with nature. You know, that's the second one. And then the third one is with the hands, you know, it's the empowerment, give him the sense that yes, you can do something, even if it's only very local and but every contribution, you know, it's like the colibri trying to put out the fire in the forest. You can do something, that's the empowerment. And then the hope, and I think for me that is important, because I also see a lot of the resistances, like people don't want to hear it, or people, you know, say like, oh no, it's, you know, the engineers will solve it or something. For me, well, it's an idea that I have, it has to do with grieving. You know, we're losing a world that we were very attached to, that we had, gave us a lot of comfort and a lot of privileges, and we're losing that. And you know, a traumatic loss, the first phase is always denial. It can't be true. It cannot be true. The second phase is anger. Oh, it's the Chinese, you know, they have to solve it. The third phase is negotiating. You know, what if I buy an electric car instead? Then can I then go on? And then only the next phase is when you accept it and say, hey, let's face it, you know, it's, you know, we have to let go of that. And then you can open your mind and your spirit to the new emerging reality. And that is for me the hope dimension. So this is why, you know, in my, you know, what I call or learning together, you know, and universities are built for just the head. You know, you have auditoria with a professor who knows, who can read the Bible, and you know, the rest of the audience are the illiterate ones. So you have like a one-way broadcasting architecture. Still, I mean, try to find a space for co-creation with students at the university. I can tell you it's very hard. And so, you know, this is really what why I think universities should become the fora where we co-create knowledge with entrepreneurs, with the leaders, but they have to let go of their paradigm, and that takes time and it takes hope.
Yes.
And then I think I mean, it's very inspiring, all this conversation, because I'm trying to take this into action for the next steps. And I'm just thinking, even the education part that you're working on, Anne, for example, if we could create some kind of agile environment that's an ecosystem that kind of sits horizontally over these establishments that already exist, but having mentorship, people, inspired individuals to work together to bring this education out of the institution, take it directly into the entrepreneurs, like Sarah, like Vera herself is an entrepreneur. And she herself is also an agent of being a mentor within this ecosystem, which, you know, she's part of. So we can all kind of work together, and people like Michelle, who actually created these things and are seeing it work. So we create an agile ecosystem on top of it and look for funding and say, look, we want to create a regenerative business ecosystem. And by business, we mean any entity that creates value. I always say somebody at home looking after the kids is doing business, because they're creating huge value for society. And we forget that that's business. You know, and we don't even measure it in the community, in the economy. You know, so only when you want to pay for childcare, you suddenly realize, you know, what that's actually worth, because people then start charging market rates for you. And you know, and you know, I there's all kind of examples of that. You know, here in Spain, you know, if you get an official child carer that's not part of the commons, they'll charge you 50% more. If you get somebody who's an immigrant, maybe with less qualifications and so on, you pay half that price. Yeah, so it's just, you know, I'm just trying to explain that, you know, we can create an economy that's different than what we've talked about.
I think I think a module or or I don't know, whatever. I don't have any ideas, but I think there is definitely a way you could get that into all these accelerators, business schools, universities, to at least to get entrepreneurs thinking about it, because it's much easier to put sustainability in at the beginning than retrofit it. So I think Anne, there you go, you've got your business model now, you're off. I think it would be a fantastic thing for human nation to do. I really do.
Yeah, I really hope that we can build this community, because this is something we co-create. So I hope that out of these, the third seminar, actually the webinar, is about exactly the peer-to-peer community-based, and what Michelle also mentioned, which was the fourth sector. So it's about these emerging hybrid organizations that actually do want to make money by dealing with these commons. So yes.
Maybe somebody else trying to talk here. I'm thinking maybe Sebastian.
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting. This is open.
Great. No, I think we were just saying about kind of creating this ecosystem for kind of regenerative enterprise hits a lot into something that I think both Vera had said and I think Sarah had said, that especially when you're looking at kind of the entrepreneurship and the kind of the business world, especially for kind of their business, there is this idea of sustainability as this added plus. It's not fully integrated into the mindset. The paradigm hasn't completely shifted yet. It's more like this kind of extra bonus that you sprinkle on top. And you can notice that because even within kind of innovation, sustainability innovation, the metrics by which you're designing and you're kind of measuring the success of all these businesses and entrepreneurships are always kind of metrics from an old paradigm. It's all metrics of return, very economic kind of financial capital based. So I think one of the key things to be able to create this has to be a change in the way that we are measuring success, right? And I think that also maybe turns into something that Pierre had said of young people or entrepreneurs feeling a bit of anxiety towards, and I think it's this clash between seeing that there's these needs that need to be, or things that need to change, these necessities that need to be addressed, the crisis that needs to be solved, and feeling that there are very few tools at their disposal to be able to kind of really implement change from the bottom up in a significant way. I think that a lot of the times all that inspiration, all that creativity is funneled into ways of doing things that you always, not always, but I mean, no matter what your kind of your initial desire is, you start getting sucked back into the paradigm of kind of the business as usual. So kind of just that idea, I just thought as you were all talking, it was kind of joining all those things together for me. Kind of you're trying to start a business, the way that you're measuring it isn't the the real appropriate way, and so you often hit these roadblocks that are make it really hard to kind of start something, for example, that values natural capital, social capital. How do you get the money to start that? How do you join an ecosystem of like-minded individuals who have money to fund that thing, but who will not ask for the same kind of return on investment that you would normally want out of it, just a regular business? So how do you get the money, the time, the infrastructure, the kind of the creative commons, everything involved into one kind of system?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's gives you the right mindset, because without capital you cannot start, but you need to have a capital that is aligned.
But can I say something about that?
Please go ahead. And
yeah, those models. There's already so many experiments on that. Crowd funding and community-supported agriculture, cooperative people invest money, do not expect a financial return on their investment. They expect a societal value. But of course, those are the the minority models, and there is no level playing field. They're fighting an uphill battle, and that's why it's so important what Michelle is saying. We need to create those interfaces and make them more shock-proof. You know, that they're still experimental phase. So yeah, things will go wrong, and then everybody say, you see, it's not a solution. You know, you see, it's not. So that's where responsible research and innovation should go. Look at where the future is trying to emerge, and help it, create the conditions where it can, you know, the political conditions, the business conditions, the communities are there. People are tired of giving their monies to companies that destroy the planet for their children. But it's just that they don't know that green finance already exists. Community supported agriculture exists. So that's why I'm saying no student should graduate from university without at least knowing that there is now, you know, there's crack in the asphalt and there's flowers coming through, and the flowers may be what we have to save, not the asphalt, not trying to sustain, you know, save the system, as you say, save the old paradigm, but let go of it, you know, more, you know, feel how scary it is, but also see how hopeful it is. Look at, you know, the COVID crisis. We all discovered how beautiful it was, that there were no more airplanes and that the cars were silent. I mean, and of course the economic model was not ready for that. So now we have to, you know, do like a catch up. You know, we're going to have a lot of economic fallout. So now we learn it's not just a crisis. It's not just, you know, a problem that we're going to solve with a vaccine. I mean, the next crisis or the next, you know, it's not something that you can, you know, a crisis and then you find the solution and then we go back to normal. We're entering a new era. You know, there's no more stable climate. The seas are gone. The soils are gone. So let's adapt and create business models as you know, as Hisham was saying. It's, you know, what can we do? What can we do to survive and to have a quality of life for everybody in here? And these models exist. Michelle is working on them, but also, you know, benefit corporations and ethical banking, but it's still all in the margins, and it's not, you know, the media hardly talk about it, or on the specialized media where you already find it, and schools don't talk about it. So that's why, yeah, I like the idea of, you know, creating this agile environment but I also want to plant seeds in the institutions, because they are the big bottleneck. And, you know, whatever it takes, you know, to show them that if they want to stay relevant, they better come out and talk with people like Sarah and listen, you know, to and Vera and even you, Sebastian. I mean, this is what they need to hear, and this is where we need to tell them you're not relevant anymore unless you. And the thing is also, there's no expertise in universities about, you know, what we have to. It's not there. The expertise, the learning is happening now, you know, in all these alternative, you know, bottom-up initiatives. And so, you know, let's create
because universities are institutions that teach something that is maybe complicated, but here we are in a system that is a complex system. So you don't teach, you need to adapt, you need to experience and adapt, like life. So it's more about doing than learning. Eh?
I think absolutely. I think Jean-Paul, as you're saying, I think this agile ecosystem, and as what you're saying, and we can take the learnings back into the universities, and that will drive them to change. Because if we can, as you know, Jean-Paul saying, just demonstrate, take the best cases of these examples, which are businesses that are actually making some value, money that people are being able to live off, and showcase them, and you know, inspire other entrepreneurs to follow suit into this ecosystem, you know, in the same way as, you know, in these accelerators, they put all the logos of these great, you know, unicorns and how well they did, but these are unicorns in a different sense, because they're actually opening the path through this jungle, you know, they're creating the path for the first time. And, you know, if we can then give them this ecosystem that Sebastian is talking about, which is the funding, the mentorship, the support, so they don't feel, you know, lonely, because so many times we get bashed in the head, as you were saying, say this doesn't work, you know, you're like hippie, you know, get out of here, because we already got rid of them back in the 70s. And, you know, we're back, you know, and this is a different way of responding to what they were trying to do in the 70s without any tools, you know, so they ended up smoking, you know. Yeah, I don't know, you know, so we have to create a much more intelligent ecosystem that doesn't, I mean, as you said, we don't have a choice of going back to working in corporations and trying to solve this through there. So the bottom up seems to be the way. And this is what the third webinar, I hope we can address that.